Recovery Sort Of is a podcast where we discuss recovery topics from the perspective of people living in long-term recovery. This podcast does not intend to represent the views of any particular group, organization, or fellowship. The attitudes expressed are solely the opinion of its contributors. Be advised, there may be strong language or topics of an adult nature.
Welcome back. It's Recovery Sort Of. I'm Jason, a guy who is not Billy.
And I'm Billy. I'm a person in long-term recovery.
And we're going to do the continuation of Billy's story, the recovery years, part 2. But we did have one small piece of recap. So we got this message on our contact form on our website, which is recoverysortof.com. And while I'm talking about that, we're on Facebook and Instagram if you like really dark recovery memes or addiction memes. We're on Twitter. We're on Reddit. We're on YouTube if you'd like to see our faces while we talk, and I think you can see them on Spotify now as well. Rate, like, review, subscribe, share with your friends, donate to us, whatever, all that great stuff. But anyway, so our contact form on our website, we got a message from Refugio Zan, which I'm probably mispronouncing, and it says, I called you 2 times. Why didn't you pick up? I'm horny. Please call me. So that must have been for Billy. Answer your phone, Billy. I don't know. But that's it for recap. So let's jump right back in. So you told us last time, you were born at a young age, and then you worked your way up until recovery, kind of. So tell us about entering recovery and what happens from there.
Yeah, so I was 26 years old. Like I say, my life was a mess. I had just violated another probation, which I had a 4-year prison sentence I would have had to back up, and just was like, what the fuck? This is not how my life was supposed to be going. And for whatever reason, I had that moment of clarity, that moment of like, could drugs really be what's causing all this problem? Is it really, is it really me? Like, whatever. And then at that moment, I made a decision that I was going to try recovery versus killing myself. And I had just remembered over the years, court ordered, whatever, knew there was a meeting at our local health department on Wednesdays at 8 o'clock. Coincidentally, this was a Tuesday. And so the next day was Wednesday. And so I smoked all the weed I had, and I'm sure got all fucked up that night. And the next day just decided that I was going to try this recovery thing.
Now, I know it's probably hard to, figure this out in your head at this moment, but when you made that decision in your head that I'm going to try recovery instead of killing myself, what did you think that meant? Like, how did you picture recovery looking at that point?
Oh, well, so I don't know that it was really even that thought out. It was more like, I got to do something different. Like, this isn't working.
Okay.
Maybe I'll try this, meetings thing. I mean, it's probably more how I looked at it.
Okay.
It's maybe I'll try this meetings thing. Because I had a situation a couple of months prior to all of that. I had actually stopped I said, man, I'm going to get my life together. I'm going to fucking start being healthy and going to the gym and exercising and eating right and get off drugs. It's like a health thing more than I want to be clean kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I did that for probably about 3 months. I quit smoking cigarettes, started going to the gym every day, started like eating better and doing all these health things. And at the end of that, I ended up, I couldn't do it. Like, I couldn't stay longer than that 3 months. The drive to just get fucked up overpowered what I would have called willpower up to that, because I did all that for that couple of months with no kind of meetings or nothing. I just fucking stopped one day and said, I'm not doing that anymore.
I feel like that's incredible in itself. This idea that, like, even doing all these healthy practices that, if you told me somebody's going to stop using drugs and go to the gym and eat healthy and do all these things, I'd be like, damn, they'd probably feel better. But apparently not.
Well, I'm sure I felt better. I mean, I do remember feeling better.
Not better enough.
No, not better enough. Because it didn't address the internal shit, the why that I, used. I mean, the why it was so appealing to be outside of my own skin. You know, I was still just as uncomfortable with myself. I didn't like myself. I wasn't like, yeah, I'm a great guy that should be proud of himself. Like, no, I still had all the cruddy shit that I had done for all these years.
Right.
And up until that point, I think I had lived off the belief that it really was just like a willpower kind of thing, and that eventually I would just grow up and grow out of it and get my shit together. And then what I felt like was at my best and most sincere desire to do that, I couldn't fucking do it. I just couldn't do it. And so then I thought, well, maybe I'll go to these meetings and check that out and see what happens.
I give you credit, though. Like, that's way better than I ever could have done. That's pretty impressive to just stop and try to do that.
Yeah, I never seem to have. So when I got locked up and went to jail, or when I went to treatment or all that stuff, I mean, I could stop for short periods of time for different reasons. Oh, I got court coming up. I can't smoke any weed for 2 weeks, or, you know, I got to be clean for 2 weeks. I mean, like, I was okay doing that kind of stuff, but I looked at that as saying, yeah, see, I am managing my using. You know, I wasn't looking at the way that I used once I started. I guess, what do they call it? Like a binge?
What do they
user? Like, I don't know.
There's a saying for that. They say you're looking more at the stopping than the using, or something like that.
Yeah, or the fact that I could stop for a couple of days or a week or two, you know.
Right.
I mean, I don't know what that.
You sure you're an addict?
Yeah. I'm not. My wife says that sometimes too. No. But yeah, so then I just decided I was going to go check out these meetings and see what they were about. You know, I kind of knew what they were about because I had been around before, but I guess I had made a decision I was going to go actually try that again and see what happened. So that was a Wednesday. I went to that Wednesday meeting at the health department. I went to another meeting the next day. I didn't use either of those 2 days. I made that meeting my home group, which, if you don't know what that is, that's a meeting where you sort of commit to showing up every week and being a part of that group, a commitment that you make on a regular basis that you're going to get involved and do something at.
Yeah, but a lot of people join a home group and then never show up again.
You're right.
Or come like 3 times and never show up again. So, you know, just making it your home group doesn't actually, you know, that's the open-mindedness, I guess, but not the willingness.
Yeah, right. You got the open-mindedness, not the willingness.
So when you went to this Wednesday meeting, what was that like? Did you talk to anybody? Did anybody talk to you?
I'm sure not.
Did you raise your hand and say,
sat in the back, and I might have said I was new. I'm pretty sure I went and got a white key tag, which is the thing at the meeting.
And nobody
that you
talked to you afterwards?
I probably didn't want to talk to people. I mean, I was all fucked up mentally and emotionally and spiritually, and you know, the thing was, having come in and out of meetings over the years, I had seen people that I recognized. You know, the woman that's now my wife was actually at that meeting. I saw her then, and I don't remember if I actually talked to her then. I probably didn't. Like, I probably did the thing where I sat in the back. Like, I came in right when the meeting started, sat in the back. As soon as the meeting ended, I left. You know what I mean? Like, I probably did that.
You saw Jen and said, if I stay clean, I'm going to get with her.
But she was with someone else at the time. And her and I never actually dated back when she was around. Before, she was married at the time. We were just friends because there wasn't a lot of young people around.
Right.
Yeah. And that started I mean, I guess when I came back, I already knew from previous experiences all the quote-unquote expectations, you know what I mean? Go to 90 meetings in 90 days, get a home group, get a sponsor, start working steps. Like, I knew all those things, and I had made a decision that I was going to do all of those things from day one. Like, that wasn't, you know.
So your first 3 steps were already in action.
Probably, yeah. I mean, it's like that when they're beaten, you become willing. It was kind of that thing.
How'd you know where the Thursday meeting was?
The meetings hadn't changed very much over the years. It was still at the same place, and it was out. And the reason I picked it as my home group mostly had to do with its location and where it was. I really liked that area. It was a really pretty area. The county, it's kind of out away from other things, and you know, at this really cool old church that is like a picturesque building. So anyway, that's the biggest reason I picked it.
So what were those first few months like? Like the getting the sponsor, the integrating yourself with the recovery community and all.
for myself, it was weird. So I still lived in a house with all the guys that I used with every day, which was difficult. I mean, it didn't feel overly difficult at the time, but I don't know that I would recommend that to people.
Right.
You know, I didn't really have anywhere else to go. I mean, if I was really desperate, I probably could have found somewhere to go, but I lived in this place and I paid rent and I thought I can do this. I'll just go to meetings. But what that did was motivated me to try to reach out to people and see what people did and not want to go hang out at home. Like I would actually say to people, like, look, I live in a house with guys that are like drinking and using every day. What do people do like outside of just, I don't want to just go home. And, you know, we'd go out to eat, we'd do stuff. People went bowling, they did stuff, I don't know, normal life stuff, which when you're using all the time, you don't know what normal life stuff is. Like you just think using is what normal life stuff is. You don't realize there's all these other normal life stuff you can do that doesn't involve using.
I feel like that takes a lot of humility, like to come in and say, I don't even know what the hell people do. I just need to not go home. That's wild.
So so it may have been more, not that I didn't necessarily know what people did, because I was a pretty social person. Like I said, I maintained a job and my parents owned a business and I could dress up nice and go out to business dinners and do that. So I kind of knew what people did, I guess I would say. What I didn't know
there
is
goes the humility.
What did I like, or what did I want to do, or what things was I interested in? Like all I was ever interested in was getting fucked up, and then it didn't matter what we did. We could go fucking roller skating, bowling, jump off cliffs, whatever it was. As long as I was fucked up, I'm game. You know. But when you take that away, like, what do I want to do now? Like, how do I have conversations when you go out to dinner with people? Like, well, what do you talk about? Well, we talked about was getting fucked up, playing video games, because that's what we did. You know, this house full of guys that I live with, that's what we did. We all got fucked up, played video games.
Wow, that was back in the days of, like, Super Mario Brothers.
No, Tomb Raider. Tomb Raider was big back then.
Oh, it was like PlayStation 1 out?
Yeah, and a lot of we did liked a lot of sports games because you could compete against each other. So anyway, football and hockey. That's Madden was out then. I'm trying to remember which year, but Madden
it was like
was
blocks
out.
Though.
No,
it's like block
it wasn't
people.
That long ago. It's 2000, so it was this decade.
Yeah.
Or no, not this. Jesus. Anyway, so I just started going to meetings, and turns out there was at least one or two people that I knew from either over the years coming in and out of meetings. There was a guy that I was locked up in jail with, a guy that I knew that I used to use with, you know, people like that you just, people that had disappeared out of my life or coming in and out of my life at different times that were here. And so I just started to build relationships, and I jumped right in with both feet and made recovery sort of became my identity, I guess you would say. I was going to meetings every day. I hung out with people that went to meetings every day. That's what I did. Got involved in service commitments, you know, went to like the area service meeting and got a service commitment. So I was involved in that. And that's what I did for the next couple of years. Got a sponsor, started doing step work. I mean, my life really became about recovery.
How long did you stay in the house with the using people?
I don't remember exactly. I want to say a couple of months. It was probably between 1 and 2 or 3 months. I don't like say it's hard to remember exactly. Yeah. Basically, long enough to like save up some money. And at the time I was there, I mean, they were pretty decent guys. Like, I would just tell them, like, look, man, I violated this probation. I'm trying to stay out of jail. I can't get fucked up anymore. And they're like, oh, that's cool. That's, you know, and they would kind of leave me alone. Now, they still did what they were doing, and we're all drinking and carrying on and smoking weed every day. And they didn't quite, we didn't get into a whole conversation about, like, I'm going to these meetings and doing this thing. It was just, I was doing my thing, and they were doing their thing, and we were fine with that. So there wasn't a lot of like pressure to use or anything. I mean, we were guys in our late 20s. It was like we were beyond like the peer pressure shit. You know, we were like adults at that point. And I guess adults still peer pressure, but
I'd have probably peer pressured people in my late 20s if they had some money. Like, come on, you know you want to go get one and buy me one.
Yeah, but yeah, so then I got an apartment. I found an apartment. I was like, I don't want to stay in this place with these people using. I saved up a little bit of money, got my own apartment in my own name, which was like a first of me doing shit on my own. You know, got an apartment, set up some utilities, started paying bills, started being this responsible, productive member of society, I guess.
Was there any pushback from the house? Was that like an awkward thing to tell them you were moving out?
No. I mean, not that I remember. Might have been. I don't remember. I mean, I still stayed friends with those guys. The guy that owned the house was actually in my wedding when I got married years later. So, and I wasn't one of those people, and I'm not saying it's good or bad or indifferent, but I wasn't a person that's like, all my using friends are complete piece of shit assholes, and they're only with me, only my friends because of what I have to give them. Like, my experience was those weren't the people that were in my life now. There were different points in my life where I'd had those people. Those guys that were in my life at that point were people I had known for a lot of years. We had sort of grown up together. We had a, 15-year relationship from childhood up into our early 20s. And we supported each other and got along. And when I decided that's what I was doing, they were like, hey, man, we get it. That's awesome. That's what you need to do for you. We're not going to do that, but that's cool. You know what I mean? Like, there was no like, oh, you're a fucking asshole or none of that. And so, I mean, I wasn't hanging out with them. I wasn't like, hey, let's go all hang out at the bar. I got this recovery thing now. I'm good. It wasn't any of that. But we would still talk and, occasionally keep in touch. But
where are they now?
One of them is a mortgage broker or does home refinancing and mortgages down in Baltimore. Now, I haven't talked to him in quite a few years now. I mean, we've gotten all different directions. Another one of them I actually just ran into fairly recently. He does filming and production for a company. Turns out my company was filming some commercials that I was involved with, and he was a guy doing the camera shoots and shit for them. So it was cool to see him there. And we caught up, and I hadn't seen him in a lot of years. So I talked to him. Another guy, he fixes like off-track betting gambling machines for this big company. So he travels all over the country, goes all over the place. He lives, I think, down in Towson, but he travels all over the place all the time for work.
None of them turned into addicts, huh?
Those guys didn't. So, and that's where my story is a little weird.
Interesting. Yeah, that's definitely different.
When I stopped using hard drugs and got away from like the heroin and all that shit when I went to jail, when I got out of jail, I went and hung out with a different set of friends than all the heavy user drug friends. The guys that I hung out with after I got out of jail were guys that really just drank probably more than they should have. And they were like what I would consider your like today's like productive alcoholics. Like, I don't know if you've seen those people that are like, maybe they're like the baseball coach or whatever, that all they ever talk about is getting drunk on the weekends, or you go to their house for a party and they got fridges full of beer and they drink all the time. Like, these guys were probably those guys, just younger, before their families and shit. Now the guys before that, like the guys that I used with all the time before I went into jail, when I was heavy into like heroin and heavy drugs, a lot of them are dead. Well, let's see, 1, 2, at least out of 5 of them that I can think of right off the top of my head, 4 of them are dead. One of them's still alive. I've talked to him over the years, coming in and out of meetings. He's come in and out of meetings a couple of times. He'll seem to get his life. He'll come to meetings for a little bit. He'll slow down or manage his using for a little bit, go through a couple years, and then eventually it tanks off and he ends up back in treatment. And, that's probably the 5 of the guys that are, that I was closest with.
Right. Okay, so you get a couple years, you're Mr. NA.
I did also got involved with my wife with a couple of months clean. So I got clean in August, September, October, November. What's it, 3 months? So like we were dating by like November, December. So I had 3 or 4 months clean.
Yeah, don't leave out the 13th step.
Her and I started dating. I don't know. She had a lot of time clean. She had 11 years clean at the time, and I was just a couple of months clean, and that had its own. And it was a little odd. So she was at the end of a breakup or going through like a breakup with a guy when I first came around. And the truth was, when I first got clean, I was not interested in a relationship. It's not like, oh, I want to find a girlfriend and settle down. Yeah, I was a fucking mess. I was depressed and suicidal. You know what I mean? Like a relationship. Now, I mean, as I
fixed you.
Yeah, no, I wasn't there yet. I did get there, but I wasn't there yet. But she was dating this other guy, and him and I had actually become friends. You know, we were all friends. We kind of hung out together some, and him and her were in this breakup that had nothing to do with me, and I had nothing to do with it. You know what I mean? It was its own end of their relationship. And then they had, I don't know, they did the typical breakup. They broke up, and then the week they were back together, and then they get back together for a couple days, and then this was a terrible idea, and then they were not together again, and it was this back and forth thing.
Right.
So I had started talking to her. I think she was in my home group at the time, or joined my home group. I can't remember. But we had started talking, and we had remembered each other from years before, because again, there wasn't, back when I came in early recovery, there wasn't a lot of young people like in their teens and 20s. So the few of us that were around got pretty close, and, it was just, I'd always wondered what happened to you and what have you been doing over the years and blah, 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 blah. And, her and I just hit it off, and we kind of started dating, and as her and that other guy broke up, and I'm sure in the beginning it was more we just hung out and went to meetings together, and
that guy hated you.
Yeah, oh yeah, I'm sure he did.
Oh,
well, that's
the lesson in there is don't make friends with anybody in NA, so that way you don't have to feel bad about stealing their girl later.
No, well, like say, whatever. I mean, I didn't have anything to do with any of that, but. Yeah,
what about the bro code, man? We weren't that good of friends.
Yeah, no. They were broke up. And I'm sure that had something to, I mean, there was parts of my life always that I would say, like, if I just had, like, the right woman, and that would get me to, like, settle down and have a family and all that stuff,
Right.
That would be what I need to get me on track. Then that would be the motivation to stop. So her and I started dating, and that actually, weirdly enough, was good motivation to stay involved and to actually be more involved. A lot of people would, the cliche sayings like, oh, you're never going to make it, it's not going to work out, you're going to use, all that stuff. And at the time, what I would say, like an egomaniac person, I was like, well, I'm going to fucking show you, like, I'm going to up my recovery. I'm going to go to more I'm going to go to 3 meetings on Friday, and fuck you. I'll show you this relationship isn't, going to take me out.
So you're saying that by them being critical and judgmental, they actually helped you.
In my case, yes. Huh. Maybe that's where we get our differences of opinion sometimes, because that criticism motivates me in a weird way. And I know it doesn't for everybody, but yeah, that's funny. Yeah, so that was one of the things where I was like, well, I'm going to make sure. And part of this is I had a sponsor that didn't tell me not to get in relationships. Mm-hmm. What he told me was, whatever you put in front of your recovery, you will lose. Mm-hmm. So if you put this relationship as a priority in your life and lose focus on staying clean in your recovery, chances are it's not going to work out so good.
So here's where perspective comes into play. You spent all these years thinking it was the dudes being critical that motivated you, and I say it was that one guy being compassionate and gentle with you and saying, it's all right, Billy. Like, you just can't put it in front of your recovery.
Yeah. I mean, I'm the one asshole voice now that runs around in meetings and tells people. It doesn't say anywhere in our literature not to get in relationships for a year or any of that.
Right.
People make that shit up. That's rehab shit. That ain't anything that's in our literature. Get in all the relationships you want. Fuck it. Just don't put them in front of your recovery.
So was there like judgment towards you? So my story kind of had this point where I got with somebody who was kind of popular in NA and well liked and attractive, and a lot of guys, flocked towards her direction. And when I dated her, I felt really important. I was like, oh, I feel like I'm somebody in NA, but I also feel like it inspired, people to not dig me so much.
I wouldn't say that. So I mean, I did leave that part out. So my wife was a person in this area at that time who was pretty popular. She sponsored a ton of women. A lot of people knew who she was. She had a lot more clean time than most people around at the time. And she was Mrs. NA, in this area. So it was kind of a big deal. And for a while, I was kind of known as like, oh, that's Jen's boyfriend. It was that kind of thing. And I didn't take that as feeling important. I've took it as sort of like I'm gonna forge my own path and do my own thing and figure out my own identity, and in a healthy way. Like I had my own friends and made my own relationships that were completely separate from like her friends and her relationships, and like my service commitments and what I did, were separate on purpose. You know what I mean? Like I on purpose didn't get involved. Like if she was involved with something, I didn't even get involved with that. I got involved in something else. We had separate home groups for a long time. We ended up in the same home group. That was a couple years later because we had small kids and it was easier to have the home group on the same night because you weren't trying to get get out to meetings as much. So that relationship, and it was also helpful that she was very big into recovery. Like even with a lot of time, she was still a person that went to meetings regularly, that had, service commitments, that sponsored a bunch of women. I mean, she wasn't the type of person that went to one meeting a week and had nothing to do with recovery. Like recovery was still a major part of her life too. So going to 3 or 4 meetings in a week for her wasn't a big, that was fine. That was completely fine. And she never like tried to talk me into, because I know this happens sometimes where it's like one person gets to be like, I don't want to go to meetings all the time and you're going out too much. And I never got any of that. So that was supportive, and I was lucky I had family that supported me. They were really glad to sort of have me back and see me doing well. And, I was still working for my family's business at the time, which they were actually in the process of closing down. So my family had this retail business that had been in business since 1899, and it had been started by William Turk Sr., and I was William Turk V, and only William Turks had ever run it, So I was, as a kid growing up, like I thought that was my destiny, legacy, my lineage, that was what was going to happen. I was going to inherit this retail business, which was at points in time quite successful. They had 40-some retail stores and malls all across the East Coast. And, like I just thought that's what I'm going to do with the rest of my life, So going to college or doing any of that wasn't as big a deal for me because I didn't, like, naively, I felt like, well, I don't have to go make my way in the world, so to speak. Like I'm just stepping into this role I've been destined for, when I get my shit together. And then by the time I actually got my shit together, the company was actually closing. They were in their second bankruptcy and were going out of business. And that was tough. Like I was like, fuck, what am I going to do now? Like I had no idea.
I just realized now that your name is William.
Yeah.
I don't know why that never occurred to me.
Yeah. So then I ended up getting a new, and that was all right around 9/11. So that would have been 2001. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So right around 9/11, I was actually supposed to go for a job interview in Annapolis for some retail chain, because I had like management experience in retail from a young age and, had managed stores and done that kind of thing. And they canceled the interview because the planes were crashing into shit. So, yeah, that kind of stood out in my mind. But yeah, I got in this relationship and got into recovery. And within a couple of years, I started building a life. I got a new job. I found a job. It's actually the one I'm still at now with a friend of mine who was a guy in recovery that, he saw once I got a year or so clean, he knew I was looking for a job. He said, hey, man, do you want to come check out my company? Come see if you want to work for me, which I had no idea anything about that business. It was a heating oil business at the time, which I knew fucking nothing about. But I said, yeah, and I went in a phone, and I basically started as like a secretary. I used to not like to say that. Now, like, I don't give a fuck. Started as a secretary. Like, I answered phones all day, and, how can I help you? And just fucking did what people needed done, you know what I mean? And started at an entry level, and
at least you weren't selling light bulbs.
Yeah. So the company I was going to go, it wasn't selling light bulbs, but the company that canceled the interview was a lighting company.
Huh.
so I might have been a bulber had 9/11 not have happened. This episode has been brought to you in part by Voices of Hope, Inc., a nonprofit recovery organization made up of people in recovery, family members, and allies. Together, members strive to protect the dignity of those that use drugs and those in recovery by advocating for treatment, harm reduction and support resources, and mentoring. Please visit us at www.voicesofhopemaryland.org and consider donating to our cause. And yeah, then we slowly started to build a life. You know, then she was my girlfriend at the time. She got pregnant. We had a year or so. I mean, I had over a year clean, but she got pregnant. We ended up, her dad, who we lived with her dad and took care of him. He was disabled. He had real bad health problems, health issues. And so we lived in his house and took care of him because he couldn't take care of himself. And she also had a child with a disability, which was incredibly difficult for me. So now it's one of those elephant in the room things that you don't talk about. I would say right now, just off the cuff, like I didn't grow up in a house with mental health issues. The truth is I did, and right. I didn't know that at the time because they were very untreated. Mm-hmm. You know, now I can look back and say my mom, definitely had some mental health issues, if nothing else, definitely like a PTSD from her childhood. She was severely abused growing up in an alcoholic home, and definitely had some mental health issues. That's all I don't know what. I can't diagnose it, especially now, but she definitely had some issues that shit just went unsaid. You know what I mean? Nobody really talked about it. And, to go into this environment where this kid was high special needs, a lot of problems all the time. In the beginning, we didn't have a lot of outside supports. So it was, my wife and I really trying to take care of this kid. Her dad was in and out of her life, depending on what stage of whatever she had met him in recovery. He was a guy in recovery. He was not in recovery for a long time. When I first met her, he had not been in the meetings for a long time. He had relapsed years ago. But he's been in and out over the years, and will get clean and not be clean. And
what's the age difference between you and the special needs child?
She was 11 or 12 when I met Jen, and I was 25, so like 15 years, 16 years.
Okay.
And she was a difficult kid, man. She had a lot of issues, behavioral and impulsive issues. Would scream and freak out and cuss you out and steal your stuff and it's very hard to get into, but so it was a lot. She was constantly in issues with school, and we had very controlled diets and different things. So I moved in with Jen, and we took care of her dad and took care of her daughter, and then we started having kids of our own. And the whole time, like everything based in, recovery, like spiritual living, working steps, trying to get better, trying to be healthy and be the best people we could be.
And you never thought, like, what in the fuck did I get myself into?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I was going to say, like, God, I would have been plagued by that idea. Like,
all the time. This is hard. So, and what's amazing, what's kind of fun, and it's so opposite of what I am now. But growing up in a white-collar family, in a white-collar job, I was very, and I hate to politicize things, but I'll say like Republican. Like, I don't know if you would remember the show Family Ties, and the kid Alex Keaton, he was like the young Republican,
Michael J. Fox.
Yeah, Michael J. Fox was Alex Keaton. So that pretty much is how I looked at the world too. I didn't run around in a suit and tie when I was in high school, but that was my view of the world, was like, that whole pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Nobody's entitled to shit from the government. Like, it's your job to make your way, and if you can't do that, then you just fucking need to crawl off somewhere and die, because there was like no and sympathy, no empathy for people or different struggles, or understanding, hey, you know, some people just have breaks that other people don't get, or whatever. That was not my mentality at all. I was not much on, for lack of a better way of saying it, I'll say equal rights stuff with like homosexuality or gay or, you know, any of that, you know, transsexual stuff. That was all freak weird shit to me. You know, it was like that typical naive, idealistic young person with terrible ideas.
It's brave of you to
Everything
own
was
that,
about
though.
you and doing, you know, whatever you get is what you deserve, was
Right.
sort of my outlook on life. And, you know, to get into this situation and then to meet her dad, who was this guy who had worked his entire life, supported 3 kids when his wife left. You know, his wife left and he sort of raised these 3 kids on his own, worked 2 jobs to maintain this house and support his kids, then got older and had some health problems. And the company that he worked for was like, hey, thanks, you know, here's a watch. Good luck.
Wow.
You know, after, and that's a whole nother conversation about what companies owe you after 40 years of service if they don't offer a pension in the beginning and you don't put no money away, whatever. But
Right.
that was his situation. He was on Social Security. He was disabled. You know, he had one leg amputated and had all kinds of heart issues and everything else. Couldn't drive, you know, and that's where he was in his life. And to see like, man, that guy deserves fucking better than that. Like, it's admirable that he worked these 2 jobs and took care of his kids and did all that stuff. You mean the best we have to offer him is a couple $100 a month and a good luck?
Wow.
You know?
Yeah.
So it was a very eye-opening experience to see, and then to humanize people. So I also like knew him. Like, we would sit there and have conversations around dinner, and he was this loving, caring, compassionate human being who just sort of, maybe even you could say by bad choices, ended up in this situation. But
Right.
it still didn't mean he deserved to suffer at the end of his life,
No
no matter
bad
what
choices.
his choices.
Throw them in the
Yeah,
trash.
right. So it's very eye-opening. And then to see, you know, this girl, you know, my stepdaughter with her disabilities and stuff, and to see, like, she didn't ask to be into this, and my wife had her in her 20s, and the amount of money that it takes to provide care for her, you know, is just ridiculous. Like, the amount of money that you need to do that kind of stuff. So she was on like Social Security disability and got a check from Social Security disability to try to take care of this kid's needs. And then on top of that, even when doctors and people would tell her she needed stuff, Social Security and disability would say, no, nah, she doesn't need that. Nah, we don't think we want to pay for that.
Right.
So it was fucked up, you know, to see like, wait a minute, we're the ones living and trying to support this kid. We're telling you, and her doctors are saying she could use these things, she could need these supports. And you, some asshole that's never even met her, sitting at a desk somewhere in some office in Baltimore, have decided no. Like,
Right.
what the fuck is wrong with this picture? Like, why? This is not in my idealistic version of, you know, how things go. That's not how things are supposed to go. So it really humanized some of that stuff for me and opened my mind to being just compassionate about, like, hey, some people just got a fucked up draw, and is it really that inhumane to help them in whatever way we can? Is there, you know, anyway, those experiences really kind of opened me up to new ways of thinking, new experiences that I hadn't had in my life, and being a different person. And then along with learning spiritual principles of recovery and going through the steps and, you know, doing all that.
Right.
And so within, I would say, like, my first 5 years, that would probably be like my first 5 years. I had gotten this new job, this wife, we bought a house. I think we got married in 2015, I believe. Get that wrong.
2015?
I'm sorry, 2005.
Okay.
Got married in 2005. So that was like I always, like, I joke with people. I'm like, if I break my recovery up into 5-year increments, things were completely different, you know, in each of those 5 years. So that was like my first 5 years was like building a life in the house with the, you know, 2 cars and the white picket fence and all that stuff. And so my wife's father had passed away. You know, we kind of got in a situation where luckily her sisters and her, nobody was like greedy about shit. So they worked it out where we could use like her part of the inheritance to buy the house because he had a lot of debt and stuff as he got older. So we used that to pay off his debt, and we bought the house, and we had this house on this couple acres, and we were raising my stepdaughter and my other daughter at the time. I think she was pregnant with another kid. So we were building a family, building a life. I had been at that job for a number of years. And then I got to that sort of ego place of my recovery, like after 5 years, where I'm like, I'm fucking good now. I can slack off. I don't need to do as much. I had a sponsor my first sponsor that I had decided he didn't want to be around anymore. So he left and wasn't going to meetings or anything anymore. So I kind of got a new sponsor. He was a little different. I loved the guy very much, but he wasn't big on like specifically working steps. His whole thing, he came, I think, from an AA background a little bit. So it was more that we just talk about them and then incorporate them into our life in different ways. And he sort of was like, oh, this writing and all this shit that we do drags it out forever. And that's really not probably the most practical way for people. Like once you get a few years clean, that deep dive into each. So he co-signed a lot of me not doing nothing. I mean, and he wasn't co-signing that. He said some things. What I heard was, you don't really have to do any work. But a lot of it was ego. And, I got the house and the kids and the job, and we're doing great and everything's good. And we're building relationships. We had established relationships with my parents and, her family, and everything was going good. Then probably about 10 years clean, shit got pretty bad. I'd say pretty bad. I had fallen into an issue where my middle daughter and my older stepdaughter had been molested by their grandfather, who was a guy that lived like right down the street from us. He lived literally a block away, from us, and was around our kids all the time, and, had been in and out of their life, and we had found out this happened. And it was pretty devastating. I mean, there was some, and I don't minimize anything, but we were lucky in that we have people in our lives, people that have been through trauma, even when we don't. We had a lot of people in our lives, and someone recognized something very early on. Like one incident happened with our daughter, where she went down to his house and something happened. And when she came back, the young lady that was babysitting for us was like, something's not right. What's going on? What's wrong with you? And was, because she was a person in recovery, was like emotionally aware, and started sort of asking some questions, and we found out kind of what happened. I don't know, man. That's just a testament to like being around people that are emotionally available and emotionally aware, because like I think like I knew kids that babysat when I was a teenager, and we were like drinking and getting high while somebody was supposed to be watching kids, and you know what I mean? It was like that just became the house that we partied at outside or whatever while somebody was supposed to be watching some kids. And it's like, if that situation was going on, like, who knows if anything would have been found out. But that was pretty devastating for me in my recovery. It had sort of wrecked the belief that as long as I do the right things are going to happen, and life's going to go great, and I'm living this spiritual way, and God owes me something. And I had lost sort of faith in all of that, in God, and because up till then I had went to a Christian church and did the whole. We were pretty involved with the church for a long time. I used to pray a lot. We did like Bible studies at people's house and things like that, and that worked for a long time. I don't regret that. It was an amazing experience. Growing up Catholic, I sort of had a terrible relationship with what I called God at the time, and this had built a new relationship built on all kinds of good stuff. It was good stuff. But I took some expectations and some ideas into that new understanding that didn't work out in this situation. I couldn't make sense of why this would happen. Why would any loving God allow this to happen? Those kind of things. And at the same time, my sponsor at that time was going through a pretty difficult divorce. So he wasn't available to me in a way that I needed and was used to. He was going through his own thing, and I was going through my thing. And I just more or less like isolated and kind of shut down and just became angry and resentful and bitter, and did that for a while, of just being mad. And part of that was there was a lot of things going through counseling and things with our kid, who's been through this situation, and, getting lawyers to go through legal proceedings because obviously we were pressing charges and, we were pushing forward. I mean, and again, another one of those untalked about things. So in my family growing up, when there was any of this sexual abuse kind of stuff, it was kept quiet, hush hush in the family. It was like things that people that knew talked about, but they didn't talk about it with everyone else.
Right.
There was like some shame or secrets in all that. And in our place in recovery where we were like, oh no, we're fucking going forward and pressing charges, and like this is like, we want to stop this. This isn't let's go talk to him and sweep this under the rug. Like, we press charges, and we're pretty discouraged by the legal system. That was pretty discouraging, so that didn't help any. I mean, they basically gave him a couple of years probation for sexually assaulting 2 kids.
Wow.
More or less what they gave him. They said, because he was an Episcopal priest at the time. We did get him defrocked. He was taken out of being a priest, which was good.
Defrocked might be one of the coolest words ever.
Feels good to say it.
Yeah.
Defrock that motherfucker. So, we went through all that, and at the end of all that, they're kind of like, well, he's been a good guy most of his life that we know about, so we're going to give him a couple of years probation. Which,
wow.
Yeah, it was pretty disheartening. You would think our society would do a little, but anyway, that more had to do with me and where I was, and I didn't deal well with a lot of that. So I was angry and bitter and resentful, and stayed there for a couple of years, and then basically got to one of those other points where I was like on my knees, like, this is not what the fuck I want my life to be. How did it get here? Why am I like this? I hate everything and everyone, and I hate my life, and what the fuck? And so I made a recommitment to recovery. I just decided I was going to like come back and get involved and start doing work, because that's what had worked in the past. And so that's what I did. I got a whatever. I don't know if I got a new sponsor or just reacquainted with my sponsor at the time. And because I always, in theory, always had a sponsor. I mean, that wasn't always in practice,
right.
But in theory, someone always had this title of a sponsor in my life. What that relationship looked like changed from time to time. But, so I started working with them and started back into steps and a recommitment to spiritual growth, and began a new journey of figuring out what God is and what higher power means and all that outside of the dogma or what I felt everyone had told me up to that point was it had to be this religious God out of some Christian text, and because I felt like that's what people in meetings were saying.
Yeah.
And maybe some of them even directly were saying that, but what I heard up until that point was you needed to have this God out of one of these Christian or, books. And again, I don't know if that's what they were literally saying, but that's what I heard, and that's what I felt like people were saying.
I feel like that's most people. And not, it's not a criticism of them, but I do think it's easier to kind of buy into something that already exists than to sort of create your own
got
from
it all
scratch.
Spelled out for you.
Right. It's just a little simpler. So I do think that's where a lot of people are. So even if they're not trying to say that everyone needs to be there, it's kind of easier to talk about it from that place because everybody sort of understands it.
Yeah. And that's where I've been, at least for the God relationship in the last 10 years is figuring out, well, what really does this word God or higher power mean to me? And how does it work within these steps? Because one thing that I always came back to, no matter what was going on in my relationship with a higher power, is there was a few basics that I developed early on in my steps that I knew if there was a higher power or if it's even possible, these are things that I would think they would want from me, or these are things that I can base my life in. And they were like, probably not doing drugs, staying clean, living spiritual principles, and continuing to work the steps and help other people. Like those were some basic foundational things that I was like, a higher power, like those things on their own can be a higher power in my life. Just those things.
You've been there for 10 years?
It's changed and
so you're overdue for some change.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm still up for revision. I mean, so, and not to get too off, because there's a few things I want to mention going back, but I am back to a place where I pray regularly, which is something I have not done
What do you
probably
pray
in
to?
10 years. What's that?
What do you pray to?
I don't know. Don't care.
I love it.
You know, it's just a practice that I've decided I want to add back. So, and it reminds me, like early in recovery when I had no relationship with a God, it was the old, put your shoes under your bed and then you'll be down on your knees to pray every day. And if that's too easy, you know, put your keys in your shoes and put that under the bed. Because then you really have to get down.
What does your prayer look like? Are you on your knees or is it just...
No.
Okay.
It's more gratitude, and it's more what I would call like speaking things into the universe or wishing well for certain people. Like if I know people are struggling or having health issues, like, you know, may they be well, may they feel the love of the people around them, may they be supported and encouraged, you know.
It's almost like a loving kindness meditation.
Sort of. Yeah, I mean, and that's where a lot of it comes from, is doing a lot of like the meditations and loving kindness meditations, gratitude, humility, you know, for me, like, let me not get in my own way. Let me try to look for opportunities to practice principles in my life.
So just time-wise, we got like 10 minutes, so I don't want you to miss these few points you want to mention.
So there were a few like pretty major events that had happened through those years too. My wife and I had lost a kid during that time. She was pregnant and we didn't really tell anybody. It was in between. So we have two older girls. They're 19 and 17, and then in between there. So since I'm William Turk V, we always, like, I always wanted to say we. Yeah. I always wanted to have a William Turk VI. Like, you can't stop now. Like, what the fuck? So we had my stepdaughter, then I had two other kids, you know, two other girls. Then we lost a baby, and we had kind of decided we weren't going to try again. And then a few years later, we had my son. So there's a gap, that 4-year gap. But it was funny. We had given away all our baby stuff and decided we weren't going to have kids anymore. And then we ended up pregnant and redoing and rebuying all the baby stuff.
What's that? If you want to make God laugh, make a plan.
Yeah. So we do have a William Turk VI now. He had some difficulties as a kid, and I'm not 100% sure why, but he had some real anger and violent issues when he was younger. Things threatening us with knives, telling us he wanted to kill us and he wanted to stab us. And if you're a person like me that watches like a lot of documentaries, you realize like that shit leads to like school shootings and mass murders and stuff a lot of times.
You named him wrong. He was Chucky.
Oh. And again, it was just an area where recovery sort of, I don't want to say stepped in, but intervened in that course of action. And we said, this is not right and it's not healthy and we need to look for help outside of ourselves. And, you know, when my daughter was sexually abused, we put her into counseling and therapy, which I was a person always against. Counseling, therapy, all that stuff's fucking stupid. You don't need it. You can do things on your own. And I had become open to those things. And so, you know, we started taking my son to some therapy and he got some counseling. Now he's a great kid. He doesn't have any of those issues, at least outwardly, anymore. At least that we know of.
They're all hidden in the room now.
He's a lot older now. But, you know, it's hard to, when you're a person, when you're a couple, my wife and I were both people in recovery, you know, it's hard to go in and say, hey, we're having these issues with our kids. Hey, you know, our family's not this perfect thing that everybody thinks that it is. Like, we still have struggles. Her and I have had issues in our marriage where we've, you know, talked about separating or divorce or thought we were going to have to split up, or, you know, like those things come up in life. And people sometimes look at your outsides and don't realize like there's a lot of internal struggles that people go through that aren't necessarily public, you know, and things that you share with people in private. And when you're people that are sort of, I don't know, I hate to say put on a pedestal, but like looked at a certain way in the recovery community, it is sometimes hard to walk in and be like, yeah, I'm having some real issues in my marriage. You know, yeah, we're having some real issues with our kid. Like, he's really getting into a lot of trouble and we don't know why. And we don't know what the fuck we did wrong, you know, like, and feeling like we did something wrong, but being able to talk about that openly and honestly, that's difficult, you know, or it can be difficult if your ego's in the way. And I've learned now, like, it's not as hard because I've done it. You know, I've been able to talk about those things and realizing that what's most important is not how I feel that other people look at me, but how do I get the support and help that I need to help them get the support and help they need, that sort of thing.
I've heard the idea, like, I come into meetings and look like shit so that I can go out in the world and live like gold or something like that, right? Like, that's kind of our place to be able. And when you lose that ability to be able to share the darkest parts, if you don't have that spot somewhere in your life, it really, you hold it all inside and you act from that place instead of being able to free yourself of it more. Yeah. Talking about it.
Well, and that's been my sort of cycle of coming in and out of, I say in and out of recovery. I've always been involved in recovery. It's just changes at different times. You know, I had one of my sponsors described it as a pendulum that kind of swings back and forth. We'll go where we're sort of way out of recovery and we're way off over here, or we'll swing way back where like recovery is our whole life. And the best place to be is probably somewhere in the middle where we have like this really, balance of life and recovery.
Don't rush to get to that middle balance point, because I'll tell you right now, that's death.
Yeah.
Like the swinging back and forth is the process, and as it slows down, you're getting closer to being done.
That's probably true. But for me, like, life will get, I don't even want to say it'll get good. I'll be going along, I'll be going to meetings. Everything will be okay. Things will get busy. Kids have stuff going on. I have stuff going on. Life gets interesting. Meetings slack off. Maybe my relationship with a sponsor slacks off for one reason or another. I stop doing things that I need to do. Problems come up. I don't feel comfortable talking to anybody about them. I go internal in my own head on how I'm going to fix it and what I'm going to do about it. And that's a dark place for me.
I feel like somebody would say, it's you taking your will back and putting your hands back in your life.
It's probably somewhat, that's my understanding of higher powers. Yes, that's true. That's exactly what happens. I don't consistently run my own life well without some sort of influence outside of myself. Where I get that influence. What's that?
Sounds like you were living.
Yeah. So it's important for me to get that influence somewhere, because my way of dealing with shit on my own is not that great. The last big thing in my life that I want to talk about real quick was we sold our house. So at 15 years clean, my wife and I decided, she had always wanted to do this. This was nothing new for her. And we actually looked into doing this back when we were kids, but like when we were young, before we had kids, we had talked about being work campers. When I lost my job, I was like, well, what are we going to do? And she's like, we can be these work campers. We'll go work at campgrounds. You work somewhere for a couple of months. Then when that season's over or whatever, you find a new place to go. And you might go, in the winter, you're going to go to fucking California or Florida or somewhere warm. And in the summer, you can go wherever up north to all these different places. And you just work at these different campgrounds and travel around all over the place. Like gypsies, sort of. And we had applied for a couple of jobs and never got them. And then I ended up where I was. And of course, there was a part of me that's like, no way, that's fucking not me at all. I'm Mr. Conservative white picket fence guy. Like, that's what I think I want. But at 15 years, I'd figured out, that stuff's nice and it's great, but it all takes its own level of work and responsibility and commitment to all those things. And having a house is great, but do you like mowing the lawn and fixing the utilities, and the fucking roof leaks and it needs a water heater? And, that becomes its own thing, more so than just owning a house, Right. And same with kids and a job and all that. Like it has its good and bad. And so we decided to sell our house and to have our camper, and we traveled around the country for a couple years. And we homeschooled the kids, and that had its own bunch of challenges. It was difficult. It was a hard adjustment for them, and it was a hard adjustment for us. And in the beginning, it was pretty rough, especially with my son. We had a really, really hard time with him. He didn't want to do homeschool. He didn't want to listen to us. He was pretty angry. I don't know exactly why. He wasn't exactly sure why. It might have been we sort of moved away from family supports and his friends, and where he felt secure, in his way of dealing with that, I think, was to lash out, like, emotionally in anger. My girls seemed to do okay with it, somewhat, at least that we knew. They each sort of handled it their own way, but we did a lot of fun stuff. I mean, we went to these new places and we saw all kinds of things, and we did lots of trips, and it was a pretty amazing experience. But one of the things it did to me was pushed me away from recovery. We would go to meetings in new areas. I wouldn't know the people. I wouldn't feel comfortable. It would be different, and I would be an excuse not to go, and so I got away from meetings. And so for 3 or so years, 2.5 years, I might have meant to 10 meetings in that whole couple of years. Wow. I had no relationship with my sponsor. I mean, I might have called him 2 or 3 times over the years, and I had 1 or 2 friends that I would call like occasionally, once a month or so, just to check in and say hi. But that wasn't really recovery based. It was more just, hey, how's it going? What's going on back there? And those sorts of things. And we suffered. I mean, it was a hard adjustment, and I didn't handle it well. We didn't handle it well. My recovery suffered, and we ended up coming back to Maryland, and settling back down and buying a house where we've been now for a couple of years. So, but life is good. I've been back into pretty consistent home group, sponsor relationship, working on steps, like all those things. This podcast, like all those things, have been pretty consistent in my recovery for the last 2 or 3 years, and I feel like I'm in a really good place.
And you didn't think you would have anything to say for the recovery portion of the journey.
I know. We've had some crazy stuff happen in recovery.
Yeah,
really.
I feel like, there was just highlights of recovery parts. We still took up the whole hour easy.
I know. And I was like, my mom passed away in recovery. I was able to support her through all that. That was really difficult. All recovery stuff, man. Just living clean, experiencing life on life's terms.
What do you feel like, and I know this is ridiculous to ask because there's probably so many factors, but like what, if you could pin it on like one factor or one thing, what makes, I don't even want to say what makes your recovery good, what makes your life feel like it's in a place of wellness? Like what's the thing that's the most crucial for you?
For me, it's being able to look at myself in the mirror and be proud of the person that I am, like that's incredibly powerful. Like early in recovery, my sponsor had me do the, look in the mirror and tell yourself you love yourself. And that was so hard. Like I would cry, because I did not love the person that I was. I didn't even like the person that I was. I felt so far away from what my spirit felt, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like the person that I wanted to be in my spirit was so far gone from who I was at the end of my using, it just didn't seem like it was even possible to feel like I could like myself.
Damn, talk about a full circle journey. I feel like if you looked in the mirror now and actually sat with that feeling of how close you are to it, you'd probably cry now too.
Yeah. And I think that a lot. I mean, I feel like that's what my process of recovery has been that. And I know we've kind of shared about this before, but it's like, it's not to just be like some cookie cutter thing, some cookie cutter result of doing some work. It's to be like my authentic self, to be happy with who I am in my spirit and, to live by my values and my morals and the person that I want to be. Like that's what's most important in each of our recovery journey. That's what that journey should be about. It's like, who do you really want to be? What makes your heart happy? Like what makes your spirit, like full and exploding with like light, what does that to you? That's who you want to be. That's what your journey's about. Maybe it's different than mine. It might be, it could be whatever you want it to be, but finding that and being that, should be what your goal is in recovery.
I feel like that's that old cliche of like the goal of the 12 steps is to figure out who you are and do it on purpose.
Yeah, that's nice. I don't know that I heard that much.
I got a cliche for everything.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Thanks for sharing all that with us, man. I think that took a lot of bravery and introspection. And
I only did it because I wanted to hear your story.
I'm going to put that off as long as possible.
So now you made me go first.
We're going to book a lot of topics over the next few months, so I don't have to do that.
But now you'll wish you had went first because now that'll be out of the way.
Yeah, I know. I'm a little jealous of that. All right. So take it easy out there. Try to love yourself and be who you are. And we'll see you next week. Did you like this episode? Share it with people you think might get something out of it. Check out the rest of our episodes at recoverysortof.com. Also, while you're there, you can find ways to link up with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, YouTube, anything. We're always looking for new ideas. Got an idea you want us to look into? Reach out to us.